The clock hit 1:47 in the dead of night, and a masked phantom silently claimed Nancy Guthrie's front porch as his hunting ground. Barely 41 minutes passed before she was completely erased from the face of the earth. The moment federal investigators breached the doorway hours later, a chilling reality washed over them. Pure evil had visited this home. Crimson stains painted the entryway, while the security camera was violently torn from its mount. Yet Nancy's cell, cash, and life-saving heart pills lay completely undisturbed indoors. Music, to the seasoned detectives working the scene. This eerie puzzle pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Nancy Guthrie was forcefully taken against her will, absolutely never walking out of those doors on her own accord. Furthermore, the midnight intruder who breached her sanctuary probably dropped the sole breadcrumbs that could solve her dark fate. So hit that subscribe button to follow the case. The second law enforcement set foot on the elderly woman's stoop. An overwhelming sense of dread hit them. Red smears were clearly visible, not just tiny specks, but a glaring streak across the threshold, a horrifying detail that instantly flipped the entire trajectory of the search. They were no longer hunting for a lost wanderer, because they were now standing in the middle of a brutal crime scene. Cops rapidly locked down the perimeter, allowing crime scene techs to log every single piece of evidence, capturing close-up shots of every crimson drop on the decking. Music. That is when the squad caught sight of another chilling anomaly. The front porch surveillance lens had completely vanished. The hardware was violently yanked from the siding, forcing the team to immediately ask themselves a very dark question. What kind of phantom destroys a security feed unless they are terrified of being caught on tape? Meanwhile, the interior revealed an even more bizarre setup. Nancy's mobile was resting peacefully on the island, her purse totally unbothered, creating a bizarre mystery for an 84-year-old with severe health issues. Abandoning those crucial lifelines voluntarily was simply out of the question, leading the authorities straight down a terrifyingly grim path. The elderly resident never marched off that property voluntarily, because a sinister force dragged her into the night. Consequently, the horror that unfolded on those music wooden planks likely sparked this whole nightmare. Detectives ultimately managed to salvage a massive breakthrough from the victim's damaged surveillance drive, a tiny, chilling snippet of digital footage. This clip revealed a shadowy figure advancing toward the property at precisely 1:47 in the dead of night. The surrounding Catalina foothills were practically a ghost town during those ungodly hours, completely devoid of any passing cars or street traffic. However, the stranger striding up Nancy's walkway showed zero signs of panic, moving with a terrifying calmness, while fully concealed in a heavy winter balaclava, dark tactical gloves, and a jet-black coat. A bulky rucksack was secured firmly to his back, gear that forensics eventually pinned down as an Ozark Trail brand pack. The most bone-chilling detail for the profilers, though, was his brazen approach towards the lens. He made absolutely zero effort to duck out of frame. On the contrary, he marched straight, music for the tech, locking eyes with the glass sensor as if he were deeply fascinated by it. A heartbeat later, an outstretched palm swiped over the glass, instantly plunging the entire digital broadcast into permanent, absolute darkness. Clearly, this guy was no ordinary burglar looking for a quick score, a fact that forced the squad to confront a horrifying reality. Since he arrived fully equipped to blind the security system, what other wicked acts were on his agenda, prompting the task force to zero in on a very narrow chronological window. From the exact second the disguised stalker hit the deck to the terrifying instant Nancy's heart monitor shifted its rhythm, a deadly window opened. Music. Exactly 41 minutes ticked by, a fatal window where pure chaos erupted indoors. While her smart timepiece remained tethered to her mobile via a wireless link, suddenly, at 2:28 in the morning, that digital cord was slashed, proving the elderly woman was either dragged or driven far out of transmission range. The sweet senior never just strolled off her property into the abyss, because a violent predator snatched her right out of her own sanctuary. Piecing together the digital breadcrumbs, the task force built a horrifying timeline. Every single terrible act went down inside that brief 41-minute gap. Scouring the victim's entryway for a second pass, the squad spotted a glaring anomaly, relying on their seasoned instincts to spot hidden clues. Music. The violent red splatters were absolutely not a chaotic mess, but instead, they painted a horrifying, continuous path leading away from the door. The evidence crew meticulously tracked the scarlet smears from the welcome mat all the way to the asphalt, snapping high-res photos and logging precise coordinates for every single puddle. Shortly after, the toxicology lab delivered a devastating gut punch of reality. That crimson trail was a perfect DNA match for the missing woman. That single scientific confirmation flipped the script entirely for the local police, instantly upgrading a simple missing persons report into a full-blown, terrifying kidnapping manhunt. The grim reality forced the homicide division to face a truly stomach-churning mystery: exactly what volume of life fluid had been spilled across those wooden planks. Seasoned crime scene analysts understand that even the tiniest speck of hemoglobin whispers vital secrets, mapping out the struggle, the escape route, and the severity of the wounds. Initial swab tests strongly indicated that the splatter was scattered rather than pooling from a massive, singular, catastrophic, and fatal injury. Had the grandmother suffered a crippling blow right there on the steps, fighting back would have been completely out of the realm of possibility. Music. That grim theory perfectly explains the pristine, undisturbed nature of her living room, hinting that a lightning-fast ambush went down entirely under the cover of night. By the time the sleepy suburbanites could even process the chaos, the violent deed was already done. However, the forensic squad was teetering on the edge of an even darker revelation, unearthing a bone-chilling secret buried deep within the DNA swabs. As the white suit techs meticulously combed through the wreckage, they bagged what seasoned detectives hail as the holy grail of criminal prosecution evidence. Crime scene technicians aggressively swabbed the patio, lifting critical genetic profiles from immediate surfaces and bagging up scattered evidence across the estate. Detectives fully anticipated mundane findings once the lab processed those crucial forensic swabs. They assumed they would merely see traces of Nancy, or perhaps relatives who frequented the residence. But technicians uncovered a total curveball. It was an unidentified masculine genetic signature, completely distinct from the victim and entirely absent from any national crime registry. Music. That revelation plunged the task force into a deeper enigma, since assuming these biological markers belonged to the perpetrator meant something highly unusual. It signaled that this phantom assailant boasted a squeaky clean record, or at least had managed to evade getting swabbed by law enforcement throughout his lifetime. Things got infinitely messier from there, as the biological evidence turned out to be an amalgamation containing cellular structures from multiple individuals. Music. The forensic profile proved to be a tangled web of overlapping genetics. Disentangling these overlapping codes is incredibly tough, often pointing to an unavoidable conclusion that a group of assailants executed the plot. Confirming a crew changes the whole dynamic of the case, considering how much smoother abducting a senior citizen under the cover of darkness goes when several perpetrators coordinate. That disturbing realization spawned a haunting query that detectives continue to wrestle with today. Did this disguised intruder operate completely solo? Or were accomplices lurking right around the corner? 48 hours following the vanishing of Nancy Guthrie, the probe veered wildly off course, compelling authorities to rethink the very nature of this abduction. A local broadcasting crew based in Tucson received an ominous piece of correspondence. The author declared they held the missing woman hostage, extorting $4 million in cryptocurrency while promising her unhurt release upon payment. Whenever extortion demands drop, law enforcement instantly initiates an incredibly delicate and intricate verification protocol. The primary objective rarely varies, essentially boiling down to whether the extortionist actually holds the captive. They had to figure out if this was merely a greedy opportunist capitalizing on the tragedy, prompting an exhaustive forensic review of the text. Analysts scrutinized the vocabulary choices, the phrasing of the ultimatum, and highly specific descriptions regarding the residents. One chilling aspect immediately alarmed the precinct, as the letter dropped intimate facts about the estate that the press had not even reported yet: music. The stakes suddenly skyrocketed as the timeline tightened. Such non-public knowledge strongly implied the author possessed first-hand awareness of the abduction site, right before copycat letters started flooding various news organizations. Every subsequent communication echoed the original ransom plea, though utilizing slightly altered phrasing. The asking price swiftly ballooned to $6 million, contingent upon meeting a strict temporal ultimatum established by the blackmailer. This shadowy figure swore they would drop the captive off safely within 12 hours of receiving the digital funds. Authorities immediately looped in specialized government hostage brokers, utilizing their standard playbook of establishing direct contact with the extortionists. The overarching objective revolves around buying precious time to extract any actionable intelligence. Music criminals holding hostages frequently slip up during these tense exchanges. Extortionists often accidentally broadcast trackable breadcrumbs, prompting the victim's relatives to formally declare their total willingness to comply in exchange for her safe return. Savannah Guthrie personally broadcasted a heartbreaking plea, begging the abductors to supply definitive evidence of life. Music, however, the subsequent events took an utterly bizarre turn. Law enforcement braced for further directives as the clock ticked down, but absolute silence fell over the negotiation channels. Not a single additional transmission materialized. The anonymous party provided zero logistics for the cryptocurrency transfer and completely ignored the proof of life requests, terrifying the task force. Legitimate blackmailers virtually always maintain contact to secure their payout, yet this extortionist vanished into thin air. The precinct was forced to pivot toward a grim alternate hypothesis, suspecting the digital demands were totally unconnected to the actual abduction. It looked increasingly like a malicious grifter had seized upon the media frenzy to pull off a sick scam. This devastating realization sent the investigative squad scrambling to readjust their tactical priorities. Ruling out the extortion angle meant the actual culprit remained entirely off the grid, heavily implying the true perpetrator never abducted her for financial gain. Cyber detectives were still busy tearing apart the metadata of those extortion emails. Suddenly, an entirely separate breakthrough violently shifted the trajectory of the massive manhunt. Law enforcement down in Southern California apprehended an individual identified as Derek Kella upon successfully tracking a blackmail email to his location. The squad felt confident they had finally nabbed the phantom cybercriminal attempting to extort millions of dollars for the victim. Yet the moment they dragged him into the interrogation room, detectives unearthed a revelation that absolutely floored the entire precinct. Derek Kella proved to be completely and utterly uninvolved with the physical disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. A sick opportunist watching the evening news that was all he really was, confessing to police that he merely saw a chance to cash in on a headline-grabbing tragedy, thinking a terrified family would instantly wire cash without asking questions. He fired off that fake extortion demand, executing a completely amateur scheme. The entire stunt boiled down to a cruel cash grab preying on a family's absolute worst nightmare. Law enforcement officers burning the midnight oil to locate Nancy suddenly faced a massive, frustrating hurdle. The moment a fraudster injects themselves into a kidnapping timeline, every single subsequent threat loses its credibility. Authorities were suddenly forced to sift through the incoming demands, desperately trying to separate the actual abductor from the copycats seeking a quick payday. Every piece of correspondence required microscopic analysis, forcing tech teams to hunt down dozens of phantom IP addresses. Teams meticulously authenticated every single threat to figure out if they were finally speaking to the monster who took her. Concurrently, the manhunt exploded across the state of Arizona, pulling in hundreds of federal agents and local deputies. Eyes in the sky from whirring drones to state-operated choppers swept over the vast, arid wastelands bordering the victim's subdivision. Canine units aggressively scoured the dusty hiking paths and barren riverbeds weaving deep into the Catalina foothills. Detectives simultaneously initiated the grueling task of scrubbing thousands of hours of CCTV footage harvested from adjacent streets. The ultimate goal was spotting a getaway car, fleeing the zone during that critical vanishing window. A mission bolstered by staggering community support, fueled by nationwide media coverage. The tip lines practically melted down as citizens called in over 50,000 potential leads. Yet, even with an absolute mountain of crowdsourced data flooding the precinct, the most terrifying piece of the puzzle remained unsolved, as the masked intruder caught on tape at 1:47 in the morning remained a total ghost. Crime scene technicians relentlessly processed the physical clues left behind, placing their biggest bets on a mystery biological profile pulled from the yard. Should that microscopic genetic material strike a match within an ancestry database, they would finally have a name to slap on their prime suspect. But until that miracle hit, the truth was incredibly grim. An unknown predator had seamlessly breached Nancy Guthrie's residence under the cover of darkness, snatched her from her own sanctuary, and evaporated into thin air without a trace. leaving a cold case that only grew more baffling as weeks turned into a seemingly endless search. Doubling down on their efforts, evidence recovery specialists marched back into the Guthrie residence to tear the crime scene apart one more time. The brass had officially shifted gears, ditching the standard missing persons protocol to treat the property like a legitimate ground zero. Every solitary inch of the interior required microscopic scrutiny, hiding potential clues that could paint a picture of the exact nightmare that unfolded across that critical 41-minute time frame of the abduction, prompting teams to start their sweep right at the front door. That blood-stained entryway instantly transformed into the central focal point of the entire forensic operation. Utilizing advanced chemical reagents, lab techs hunted down invisible biological materials, leveraging science to expose hidden footprints of the struggle, mapping out precise injury locations, or exposing frantic attempts by the attacker to bleach the scene. The glowing results backed up their worst fears, highlighting microscopic crimson droplets dragging straight from the threshold down to the pavement. This specific spatter distribution pointed toward a dynamic, rolling altercation rather than one isolated, fatal blow. Simply put, Nancy was likely bleeding but entirely conscious while being dragged away. A theory compounded by a chilling discovery indoors. The interior was hauntingly pristine, featuring perfectly arranged living room sets and securely latched cupboards. All of her intimate belongings sat exactly where she always stored them, setting off massive alarm bells for the seasoned detectives on site. Typically, a violent residential breach leaves behind absolute chaos in the form of shattered glass, trashed living spaces, and upended possessions that clearly broadcast a desperate fight for survival. Yet this house lacked a single scuff mark, hinting that the ambush was lightning fast, likely occurring right at the threshold before she ever realized what was happening. Leading officers to inventory her abandoned possessions, her smartphone sat completely idle on the island, right next to her fully loaded billfold. Critical daily prescriptions for her cardiac issues were totally untouched, proving an 84-year-old patient with severe health problems wouldn't have just gone for a stroll empty-handed. It was the exact puzzle piece the task force needed to solidify their most sinister working theory. She never packed a bag to leave. She was violently extracted from her life. A fact soon compounded by yet another bizarre technological clue. Cyber experts managed to scrape together tiny bits of corrupted server files from the residence's smart alarm network. Even though the primary lens was physically torn off the brickwork, auxiliary sensors scattered across the yard had tripped during the breach. Pinpointing these electronic triggers gave authorities the power to map out the exact chronology of that masked phantom creeping toward the porch. Counting down from his initial approach until the terrifying second her smartwatch severed its wireless connection. Exactly 41 minutes had slipped by. 41 minutes is all it took for an entire life to be erased, leaving detectives certain that the entire nightmare unfolded within that devastatingly brief time frame. Yet, glaring at them from the crime scene was a physical clue impossible to sweep under the rug. Genetic material lifted from the property drew a complete blank across national offender registries, pointing to a ghost, a male subject whose fingerprints had never graced a police blotter. For the task force, landing this phantom profile felt like a double-edged sword of maddening dead ends and undeniable promise. The agony lay in not slapping handcuffs on a suspect today, while the silver lining was knowing biology never truly forgets a secret. Cutting-edge science now empowers law enforcement to run these ghost sequences through family tree websites, unmasking killers by simply following the branches of their distant cousins. Over the last 10 years alone, this exact ancestral blueprint has cracked notorious cold cases wide open, dragging long-buried monsters into the light. The dedicated task force, spearheading the hunt for Nancy Guthrie, are banking on that exact genomic magic to finally name the shadow lurking on her doorstep. While waiting on the science, the forensic team is practically tearing the residence apart looking for microscopic breadcrumbs. They are convinced that somewhere inside those peaceful walls nestled against the Catalina foothills, the horrifying reality of Nancy Guthrie's fate is patiently waiting to be unearthed. Several agonizing weeks have bled by since Nancy vanished into thin air, leaving a gaping void where answers should be. Even with a massive regional manhunt tearing the county apart, authorities remain utterly blind to the horrors contained within those pivotal 41 minutes. The operation has burned through hundreds of federal agents, local cops, and crime scene technicians. Unmanned aircraft swept endlessly over the vast desert expanses, while canine units desperately sniffed out phantom tracks winding through the arid basins and mountain trails. Analysts practically went blind, combing through endless weeks of security tape from neighborhood porches, local storefronts, and intersection stoplights. Armchair detectives and concerned locals have flooded the tip line with over 50,000 potential leads in a desperate bid to bring her home. And still, the faceless intruder creeping up to her door at 1:47 in the dead of night remains a total enigma to the brass. That chilling snippet of digital film is the holy grail of this entire nightmare. Moving with icy precision and zero hesitation, he blinded the lens, ripped the hardware from the stucco, and simply melted away into the pitch-black night. The timeline immediately following that blackout is a terrifying abyss. Lab coats are still running tests on the physical traces pulled from the estate, clutching that nameless biological profile as their absolute best shot at a breakthrough. Cops are betting everything on next-generation ancestral tracking to eventually unmask the monster behind this crime. Pending those lab results, the files stay squarely on the active desk while her loved ones suffer through a waking hell of uncertainty. Each fresh update is a sickening roller coaster, offering the promise of long-awaited closure alongside the gut-wrenching dread of a profoundly gruesome reality. Amidst the chaos, the task force cannot shake one glaring certainty. Nancy Guthrie absolutely did not wander off under her own power. A predator specifically targeted her residence under the cover of darkness, disabling the surveillance net and spilling blood right on the welcome mat. This same intruder snatched an 84-year-old grandmother right out of her life, inexplicably leaving behind her lifeline devices and cash, as well as the critical pills she relied on to stay alive, convincing the precinct that a walking witness holds the key to those missing 41 minutes. Unless that conspirator is dragged into an interrogation room, this chilling abduction will fester as one of the darkest unsolved enigmas of our modern era. Hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into true crime. This story is a haunting reminder that danger can arrive quietly, in moments we least expect, and change everything in an instant. Nancy Guthrie's disappearance shows how fragile safety truly is, even within the walls we trust the most. One ordinary night, one small window of time, and an entire life was taken. But beyond the fear, there is a deeper lesson about awareness and preparedness. We often assume that home equals safety, yet real protection requires more than locked doors. Functional security systems, consistent communication, and checking in on vulnerable loved ones can make a life-saving difference. This case also highlights the power of science and persistence. Even when a criminal tries to erase every trace, the smallest fragment, a drop, a fiber, a hidden signal can speak louder than silence. Truth may be delayed, but it is rarely destroyed. Most importantly, it reminds us to value human life beyond headlines. Behind every investigation is a person who mattered, who was loved, and who deserves justice. Nancy's story calls us not to live in fear, but to live with awareness, compassion, and responsibility for one another, because sometimes being attentive is the strongest form of protection we can offer.